under pressure at a certain time point, when there is so much external pressure, they suddenly separated into separate communities. It's one society, one community, but under pressure, they suddenly separated. The foundation, the denominator for how they came apart is their identities. Essentially, when you challenge people, when you put so much pressure on them, they move separately into their respective identities. So it becomes me against you, it becomes my race against your race, it becomes my religion against your religion, it becomes me as a cultural, ethnic collection of values against you. And suddenly one community starts to, neighbors killing their own neighbors that they lived with for a long time. And this insight is very important for us to keep in mind, because it's not something you can choose. You can't go and buy a certain type of food and eat it and that gives you an identity. You can't read a book and it gives you an identity. You cannot do these things. What you can do is, usually you find identities formed in a certain environment, and that environment you can shape. But beyond the environment, there's very little you can do. Let me give you an example. There was a study done here in America. An American university, they wanted to look at whether children from ethnic minorities had the values of their parents, or the values of the society they grew up in, or some sort of a hybrid. So they looked at kids, all of them were born in the US. Some were born to Asian parents, and some were born to Caucasian parents. White Caucasian parents versus primarily Chinese descendants. Now, Asian, Eastern cultures tend to be collectivist cultures, that you define yourself through people you know, through your friends, through your family. That's a very important part of who you are. In Western cultures tend to be individualistic. You define yourself of your own, so you look at yourself individually as a person rather than those around you. So individualistic versus collectivist societies. And so these are kids who are 6, 7, 8-year-olds, very young, very much the product of their own environments, their own families. I think some of them were even 5, a minority of them. And they were given help to study mathematics, just to learn to add and subtract and do these and multiply. However, the study controlled for these things, split them into 4 groups. So in each group, so the Asian kids versus the Caucasian kids, each of them had the program that they used to learn maths from was either designed by themselves, the interface, not the actual content. They just told them tweak it, shape it. So you either personalize it yourself, or you get somebody else, such as your teacher or your parent, who would personalize the app for you. Right? Essentially, either you do it individually, or somebody else who's close to you, who you respect, does it for you. And you're learning maths. It has nothing to do with religion or culture or anything like that. And you followed them over a few months. Well, they found out that children of Asian descent learnt maths better if the program was tweaked, was personalized by somebody close to them, their parents. Whereas the Caucasian kids learned maths better when they did it themselves. Essentially, the Caucasian kids were individualistic and the Asian kids were collectivist. And it's to do with learning maths. It has nothing to do with anything else. You didn't ask them, what do you like? They actually learned better versus the control group, which was very similar to them. And why is this important? Because you could see this frame of mind affects, these kids didn't choose to learn better or worse. They had no choice. It's almost, they were programmed from a young age, and when the content arrived in the format they were comfortable with, they picked it up better. And so when we think of ourselves, who do we want to be, and identities are usually formed at a young age. So those of us who are still forming their identities, this is very relevant to you. And those of us who are parents, this is also very relevant to you. Because, these are the choices you can make that can make a difference. And these things even kind of affect how we behave, how we sense, how we react to the environment. It's almost we look to others and see how we should behave. Let me give you another example. This shows you how deep-rooted this stuff is and why it's very relevant for us to consider. There was another study. What they did, they brought in people, told them they're being investigated for something, but that's actually not true. You'll notice a lot of this happens in psychology, is that you bring people, you tell them you're studying X, but you're actually studying Y. You put them in a room. They put them with other people and ask them to fill out a questionnaire. This is not too important. What is important is the other people in the same room as you are actually Confederates. They're part of their researchers. You don't know that. They're pretending to be just like you, but they're actually Confederates. And then they did a cruel thing. They pumped smoke into the room. So suddenly, imagine yourself sitting in this room, filling out this questionnaire, and then smoke comes out of the event. So they did this first with you on your own in a room, and almost always people left within a few seconds. Said, there is smoke coming out, there's probably a fire, I'm going to leave the room. The interesting thing is, when you were with others in the room, and those were Confederates, and those Confederates pretended nothing has happened. They just sat there and filled out their forms. People didn't actually leave the room. They started to look at the others. What do? Since they're sitting comfortable, you ignored the smoke. And they ignored it for a while. So that period of time went from a few seconds up to 180 seconds before they actually said something, that there is smoke coming out. And the room by now is almost full of smoke, by the way. You can't see much. But they ignored it. They were looking for somebody else they were looking for confirmation. How should I behave in this situation? Because they are ignoring it, they might be knowing something that I don't know. Therefore, I should just wait and see. Now, this is a matter, excuse me, this is a matter of personal safety that we take very seriously, right? You think your safety is at risk. The danger is immediate, you feel it, yet you ignore it. What if the danger wasn't very visible to you? What if it was something that was in the future, or something that wasn't very vivid? Something that had cultural implications, or religious implications, or, I don't know, something to do with your education, for example. You're far more likely to ignore it. And this happens all the time. And so, you can't just say, I'm going to react next time it happens. It doesn't work like that. You need to build the identity within yourself or within your offspring so that when something happens, you can react to it. So that you can react in the way you desire. It's almost you sit and say, what kind of behavior do I want? What kind of identity do I want? I'm going to create the environment that will produce that identity. But you cannot choose the identity. And this is crucial. Crucial at this time of year, because we gather tonight, and we gather these nights, and we have gathered since the beginning of this month, it's the beginning of Muharram actually, around an identity-forming event. There are so many people around this world who call themselves servants of Hussein. Nobody called them that. You go and tell them, what are you? They say, I'm a servant of Hussein. Tell them you're not a servant of Hussein, they'll be very angry. That's how they give themselves the label. That's how they define themselves. And my interest here is why? Why do they choose this particular event to define themselves and associate themselves with, to use it as a label for their own identity? You know, if you work for a company, they give you an ID card. If you're in college, they give you an ID card, right? And people are proud. They wear t-shirts, they wear logos. You associate. That's part of an identity. What do we call it? We call it an identity card. What is the purpose of an identity card? Is that you're in or out, right? If you have it, you're in. You're allowed the security clearance, you can go through the gate, you're allowed to go to school, you're allowed to sit in class, you're allowed. If you don't have it, you don't belong. You're an outsider. It has rights and responsibilities. And so we have an event which is identity forming, which and there are people out there who define themselves to be associated with this event. And we notice that this event, those people that we know them, and some of these themes I'll come back to another night in a bit more detail, but I want to draw your attention to this. You notice that these are people, they're normal people. These servants of Hussein that you see in the mosque here, they're normal people. Some are short-tempered, some are normal, some are nice, some are not so nice, you know. But the moment they associate themselves with Hussein, they become angels almost. They become the best they can ever be. Right? This is something you feel. They become very polite. They give a lot of their time. They want to help. You know, somehow they become far more tolerant when there's this association. The rest of the time, you know, they're just normal people. These days, as we speak, in Iraq, you get people walking distances, long distance. And this happens in India, happens in Pakistan, happens in other places. The distinction here is not that it's Iraq or any other place. Distinction is, there are people who normally would, you know, that it's a society that may see somebody poor in need, they would ignore them. That in their job, they would defraud somebody, give you less than you deserve in terms of, you know, you buy a kilogram of something, they give you 950 grams of something, right? There are people that would give you inferior quality, claim something to be good, but give you inferior quality. They spend the year trying to increase their wealth, just like everybody else. Comes this time of year, they shut their shop, they take from their own money to feed people. Isn't that odd? Do you see something strange here? That people who would go out of their way to make as much money out of you as possible, come here to give you the money they've taken out of you, give it to you for free. And they are so grateful that you take it. They beg you to take it. And they're very polite, and they're very nice. The jobs they would never dream of doing, cleaning floors or, I don't know, cleaning bathrooms, etc. The most honorable start to do. It becomes a competition. It becomes something really good. And you could see, the point I'm trying to make here is the power of this identity. The power of this association. It transforms people's sense of right and wrong, of respectable and irrespectable, of noble and common. It changes the definition. Just like that, the behavior of others in that room changed your sense of fear and danger. And so this event is powerful. And we get a chance once a year at it. We either make the most of it, or we just lose the opportunity. It's up to us. And so let us, while we can, take as much as we can from these days and pass it on, to keep it with us, to give us that energy, because there is something here that's special. That doesn't happen with other times of the year. It's just something really special. And as I will come on another night, I'll explain to you the process. You know, I spoke about learning methods from Ahlul Bayt and the Imams. This wasn't a random thing. It didn't just happen by accident. It took a lot of methodical, strategic work from the Prophet to Imam Ali, to Imam al-Hassan, to Imam al-Hussein, to the follow-through of what happened after the events of Ashura. It wasn't a coincidence. It was pre-planned. And I'll give you concrete examples of this. So we have this identity-forming event that is very, very important, and that it gives us an insight into the power of these days. And we want to really, we should make the most of it. Now when these groups, when these individuals come to form a group, you start to get this shared identity. You have a perfect example here in the Safar Center. You have people who come in from different races, speak different languages. Some were born in the US, many were born in different countries. Don't even share a language often, yet almost feel at home with each other. Because there is this something that's so fundamental to all of them that's shared, which is Hussein and Islam. So this is something that brings it's an example of how you get different people with different identities which have this shared common denominator. When they come together, they kind of almost feel at home. And I know for me personally, as I was introduced, I was born in Najaf in Iraq. When I go to a Pakistani center, lived in the UK. When I go to a Pakistani center anywhere in the world, or an Iranian center, or an Iraqi center, or a Lebanese center, I feel at home. I really do, genuinely feel at home. And this is something that's conveyed to each and every one of us through the identity. The danger is, my brothers and sisters, is if we don't make the right steps, when it comes to our own children, and as I mentioned, identities are formed very early on in life. If we don't, or even ourselves who are still young enough, if we don't turn up, if we don't sit, if we don't take part, if we don't share those moments with others, there comes a point in the future where we just won't feel at home. This is the lens through, an identity is the lens through which you see the world. Literally, that's how you perceive the world. If it's tinted, you think the world is darker. You don't think your glasses are tinted, you know? You don't know. That's how you see the world. So if what's coming through these glasses is distorted, your impression of reality, of right and wrong, is distorted. And then you start to make judgments on that basis, and you think you're doing the best. And so, if you want to make sure you see reality the way it should be seen, the way it is, you want to make sure that you bring yourself to an environment where all these values are imprinted, so that you can benefit and make the most of them. And so, when people come in, like I said, come in a community, it's the community that starts to imprint its values in us and shape us. And there are two. I want to give you an example, another academic study that's really interesting. It's a famous study, you might have heard of it. It's called the Ash Study. It's published in 1955. Here, just to show you how the group makes your sense of right and wrong change. Right? So what they've done, they gave people individually cards. So you had a card with a line on it. And then you had 3 lines, A, B, C, as reference. And you were told to match, essentially. So you had, you had line A, short, line B, middle, line C, long. And then you were given a separate card with the same length as one of them, and you're told which one. Very easy task. Almost 100% of participants got it right, individually. Then what they've done, they put them in a group. Again, you think they're all normal people, but actually everybody apart from you are Confederates in the study. They put them in about groups of 20, and they put them in a circle or a square. They put you as number 18, 19, somewhere here towards the end, and ask the first person, which one is the right? Let's say the right answer is A. They asked the first person which was the right answer. They said B. Second person, B. 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 Everybody up until you is saying B. Now you can clearly see the answer is A. You got it right before, you know it's A. But everybody says it's B. A lot of people, the vast majority of people, said B, not A. It was done again and again, and again, and the answer is the same. The vast majority of people say the wrong answer knowingly. And there's a video, if you go on YouTube, Google this. Go on YouTube, have a look at this. It's called the ASH study, ASCH study, and the follow-ups of the study. You find nowadays it's done with video cameras on the participant. And you see the person, when the first person says B, they just shake their heads like, it's clearly not B. Like, what are you saying? And then the next one, and the next one, and they just start to draw into themselves, sink in. When it's their turn, they say it's B. And you know what is more scary than this? Is that there were a small percentage, 30-something%, who went against the crowd initially, who said A when it was their turn. So the majority succumbed. There was a minority that actually said the right answer. But on the third or fourth attempt, they gave up. So even those who had the confidence, you would think the first time you go against the crowd is hardest, right? Those who had the confidence to say the right thing first, after 3 or 4 attempts, they just gave up. It's like, it takes so much energy, so much effort to go against the crowd that you just say, whatever, I don't care. I'm just going to say whatever I'm supposed to say just to avoid the pressure. There's a version of this, again, if you go to YouTube, I don't know what the search terms would be, but they actually showed it was on a, I think it was a US program on TV. You see people in lifts. Again, one person goes into a lift, elevator, apologies. Person goes into an elevator and others follow. And then, you know, usually people kind of do whatever. And then all of these others who are Confederates turn to a certain direction. All of them look at the door. You see that person gradually turns until they look at the door. Then all of them turn to look at, I don't know, the mirror in the back of the elevator. And that person turns again, slowly. You know, they do this, they make it look like they're not really succumbing to the pressure, but they do. Now, why is this important? You'll see, how is this relevant? I'll tell you how this is relevant. This is how people start taking drugs. This is how people start to think certain behaviors are acceptable. This is when people start to pick and choose which parts of religion they want to follow. This is how people start to choose when and if they turn up to the mosque. When and if they deal with their parents or their siblings respectfully. When and if they do their fair share of contribution to society. Because then your definition of right and wrong changes. And that's the point. So when these people, remember the line experiment? These people were interviewed as a follow-up. Some of them knew they were giving the wrong answer and they gave it. Others actually, they just didn't know. They said, I started to doubt myself. I thought the answer can't be A because everybody thinks it's B. I must be mistaken. Do you see what I mean? See how dangerous this is? This is the kind of the glasses through which you see the world. You think, well, I must be wrong. I can't be the only one. You know, I'm the only one who thinks it's A. Everybody thinks it's B, or the other way around. Therefore, they're probably right. Extrapolate it to how we should dress. Hijab is a classic example for the sisters, and then for the brothers as well. Hijab is also, hijab applies to both genders, just the degree is different. Same thing. It's defined by society. And so if you're not careful of where you put yourself, then it's a risk. And as we move on from this time of year, which through that powerful identity of Hussein, that brings us together to purify ourselves, to kind of learn a bit more, to get together, we are at risk now at the end of the season to move away from it, to go back to the norm, to the social pressure. And so let us make some serious decisions about our commitments to ourselves, to our communities, and to keep the momentum, not to lose it, because now is the dangerous time. Now is the time when we begin to lose things. And so, spoke about identity and how society, how the environment affects this identity of the values within it. Now the next thing that kind of follows from this is how does Islam balance, or where does Islam draw the line between the individual responsibility and the society's responsibility? We spoke about both. I'm going to draw your attention to something very important here. There are extremes in the world that have just focused completely on the individual. This is the society we live in. Very individualistic. Very much it's you. This is extreme capitalism, which says it's you, it's about your earning, it's about your gain, it's you first, and if you have time, if you want to, you can enable others, but it's you first and foremost. And you have other models that have gone the other extreme, which just focused completely on others. There's no individual role, there's no individual responsibility. Communism is an example of that, where society owns everything, society distributes everything, the individual is unimportant, is ignored. And you see, Islam, on the one hand, says, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى, that nobody takes the burden of sin from somebody else. Nobody takes responsibility for other people's actions. So it's your responsibility. Your actions are your responsibility. Yourself, this is your responsibility. But it also says, قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ. That it's your duty to protect yourself and your family from hellfire. It also talks in other verses, in other narrations from the Prophet Ahl-Bayt about your responsibilities towards society. Essentially, there's a dual responsibility, individual and society-wide responsibility that each and every one of us has. Why is this relevant? Because, and I'll expand on this another night, but I just want to raise it tonight, because we have this culture of consumerism. We think it's somebody else's responsibility to set up, fund, organize, do everything else, and I've done them a favor by turning up, if I have time. So for me, my Islamic role is work and money and life and everything else, and if I have time, I'll turn up. But for somebody else, it's an all-consuming commitment, all day, all night. Somebody else has to provide, and I collect, and I gain. And this is a balance that we need to be very careful of. Very, very careful of, because we have responsibilities both ways. And the verse I started with captures this beautifully, hints at it beautifully. So this is the verse. I only took the second half of the verse. The first half talks about when people ask the Prophet questions. Some people came to the Prophet and said, what do we do when this happens? Is this allowed? Is this not allowed? So they asked him about wine, specifically, alcohol. They asked him about gambling. يسألونك عن الخمر والميسر. That's the beginning of the verse. And the Quran says they have benefits, and there's a positive essentially, and there's a negative side, and the negative side outweighs the positive side. Then this verse comes, which is kind of in an unrelated topic, and they ask you, O Prophet, what do they give? What should they give? So people came to the Prophet, because Islam created this culture of giving. Give, 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 give. Defines giving as a gain, not a loss, which is quite a different frame of mind. Giving is a gain, not a loss. And so they came to the Prophet and said, what do we give? Some people were giving everything they had. They were giving everything they had, and they let down responsibilities that they had towards others and their families, for example. So their families were living in poverty while they were giving others. Obviously, this can be a very good thing within limits. After you fulfill your duties, then you go. And then there were others who held onto a lot and they just kept it to themselves. And so they came and asked the Prophet, what do we do? His response was, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ مَاذَا يُنْفِقُونَ قُلِ الْعَفُوِ. A lot of people, especially those of kind of Arabic descent, think al-afu here means forgiveness. That's actually not the intended meaning here. The intended meaning is the surplus. What do they give? They give the surplus as the response. So al-afu is the extra, the unneeded, the surplus. And this, I'm reciting this verse to bring to your attention this really interesting distinction, where this word, al-afu, captures both responsibilities. That on the one hand, you have your individual responsibility to yourself, to fulfill your needs, to fulfill your basics. You achieve a baseline for you, for your family, but you don't just keep everything. The collective responsibility begins when it's extra, when it's unneeded. And the definition of need here is conservative, not need isn't, I need to live in a very extravagant house. I need to own 10 cars. That's not a need. Right? Need is basic need. Now, why is this relevant to us? It's relevant to us because often when we think of giving, we think of money. That's what we think when it comes to giving. But we don't think, for example, of time. Now, some of us, especially the younger ones of us, might not have the financial means to support a center. But it's not just money that a center needs, that community needs. It needs educators, people who have the time to teach. It needs people who come in and set up. It needs people who make phone calls. It needs people who will contribute in many other ways. And we need to get it in our minds, my brothers, my sisters, that we as individuals have a responsibility to our communities in multiple ways, multiple means, whether it's knowledge, whether it's time, whether it's whatever. Could be money as well. But there are many layers to giving. Giving is not about money. So Islam establishes this culture. People come to the Prophet and say, I don't have any money to give. He gives them, different people ask the same question, he gives them different answers. Some he says, go and pray for others. Some says volunteer in the community. Some says, essentially nobody can say, I have nothing to give. And this has a beautiful flip side, is that in Islam, everybody is valuable. Everybody has something to offer. So don't think of yourself as useless. You're not useless, you have something to offer. If you think you're useless, you just haven't found what you can contribute. And you can do this yourself, or you can ask. Say, well, this is my skill set. Where am I needed? Where do I fit? How can I contribute? And this is, again, one of the lessons you find in this month. In the events of Ashura, that there was a role for everybody. It wasn't just Imam Hussein giving, was it? There was a role for everybody, old and young, male and female, fighter and non-fighter. Everybody contributed. And this is a powerful message that we need to absorb, we need to take, we need to internalize so that we can actually benefit and learn from it. And so when these people, as I said, when they came to the Prophet and said, what do we give? He told them to give surplus, but wasn't defined in monetary terms. And this has an implication, my brothers, my sisters. Implications, but one of them, you here, us Muslims living in the West, have opportunities that don't exist to many others. And this applies to all of us, old and young. That you have some of the best schools in the world, some of the best universities in the world. And Ahlul Bayt, when they taught their companions, they taught them to be the very best. Aim for the highest. Be the very best. Achieve. And this is not, like I said, it's in multiple ways. It could be in knowledge. And you found the founders. Today, when you research science and you look at the founders of modern science, you find many of them were taught by Ahlul Bayt. The foundations of which came, some of them through Ahlul Bayt. Chemistry is an example of that. Experimental science is an example of that. And let me tell you a story. Usually, I go to Najaf reasonably often, and when I go, I visit the Maraji. And I usually, if it's near the time of Muharram, I ask them, this year I happen to be in this country, in this location. Is there any message you want me to pass? Is there anything that you want me to share? And on multiple occasions, when I ask Sa'ad al-Atmasi Sistani this question, he tells me this, and I'm passing on to you as a message that he passed via me. He says, first of all, I pray for them. I think of them. They have a challenge and an opportunity in that the challenges are big, but again, the fact that they gather and they commemorate this is very important. But he says this specifically, and like I said, it's different years, and he just kept saying the same message. Tell them they have opportunities that others don't have to excel in science, in knowledge, in engineering. Tell them that the followers of Ahlul Bayt should be the best in these fields. That they shouldn't aim to be average. They should aim to be the very best. And I respect, these are his words, I respect those who are the best in their field for the fact that they're knowledgeable. I respect them for their knowledge. He's not talking about religious knowledge here. He's talking about anything. Knowledge. And we have it at our fingertips. We have it at our fingertips, and often we miss it. And if we think of ourselves as ambassadors, as those who share an identity with the many others all over the world, we can be constructive contributors to humanity. We have contributed a lot in the past, but those are our forefathers. How about us? How about you and me? We should contribute, and we can do so through our manners and religion. That's a huge contribution. But we could also do so through science, through knowledge, through achievement, through success, within the limits of Islam, of course. You abide by the law and go and succeed. And the community will be proud of you, and Ahlul Bayt will be proud of you. And so, let's not narrow the role of religion to something very narrow. Let's not think of religion as turning up once every blue moon to the mosque, or praying very quickly just to get it over and done with. It extends far beyond that. And as long as we understand these values, when we do that, we become far more effective ambassadors to the communities we live in. This community is not that different to the community that the Prophet came into when he brought Islam. He was a Muslim amongst a Muslim minority in a non-Muslim majority. What did he have for those people? Did he have hate? Or death? Or terrorism? Or anger? No, they attacked him. He didn't. He had a message that he believed so strongly in that he wanted to share out of love for people. Those who accepted, those who didn't, it's up to them. That was the message of the Prophet. And we have the same opportunity now to emulate and to learn that method from the Prophet. And you see how this can, how just behavior inspired by these identities can completely change how other people react to us. Let me tell you a final story. Imam Zayn al-Abidin, one of the great heroes of Ashura, his role was especially important post Ashura. In these days, his role was extremely important. Imam Zayn al-Abidin was living in a very difficult situation. He suffered a lot. He witnessed what he witnessed, and then he lived after that in Medina. The governor of Medina was given a duty. His task, one of his tasks, is to be as bad as possible to Ahlul Bayt. And so one of his daily rituals is to, when he does his prayer in the central mosque, this is the Prophet's mosque, by the way, the Prophet's mosque. Imagine Imam Zayn al-Abidin. This is his grandfather's mosque. This guy stands where his grandfather used to stand and curse Imam Ali alayhi salam, and curse Hassan and curse Hussein in public. And did so for years. And Imam Zayn al-Abidin knows this. So one day, as it happens, this guy had, put all his eggs in one basket, has aligned himself completely with the ruler of his time, who was one of the Umayyad dynasty. And that guy flipped. He died, his son came and changed. And so he was the previous favorite. He's now unwanted because he had too much, he terrorized the people of Medina. They complained against him. So what the new Khalifa ordered, Al-Walid, what he ordered is for him to be stood next to the mosque, and whoever has a problem with him, come and take him. So people came and slapped him, people spit on him, people beat him up, people said, you took my money. Imagine somebody who was one day a dictator, and now he's in the hands of the people. He used to say, I can tolerate everyone except Ali ibn Hussein. I know what I've done to this guy. In his own words. He used to say, everybody is okay. I've done bad things towards people, but I know what I've done to Ali ibn Hussein. So when his turn comes, that will be the end of me. And then Imam Zayn al-Abidin once was walking past, and the Imam ignored him, never went, never saw him, never said a word to the guy. This is not about being weak, it's actually about being a deep thinker, and I'll come to this in a second. So one day Imam Zayn al-Abidin is walking with a group of his kind of nephews and cousins and relatives, essentially walking with him, and he's the leader of the family. So some of them said, kind of pointed out to the guy that, this is the person who's here, kind of almost wanting to kind of say something negative towards the guy. And Imam Zayn al-Abidin told them, just nobody say a thing. He just walked past. And the guy, historians say, looked at the Imam and was completely puzzled. He's not just not retaliating, he's preventing others from retaliating. He's protecting me almost against others. And he shouted, after the Imam went away, he shouted these words, Allahu a'lam haythu yaj'alu risalata. Allah knows best where He sends, or from whom He sends His messenger. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the mechanisms by which to deliver a message best. Essentially, you belong to the Prophet, and what I see in front of me are the manners of a Prophet. What the Imam has done made this guy, who was a ruler for Banu Umayyah, challenge his own assumptions. He had a certain image of Ahlul Bayt, and now he himself volunteers. He became almost an educator for Ahlul Bayt, saying, look, this is how prophets behave. This is how the carriers of a message behave. And we are in a similar situation, my brothers, my sisters. We, in our hijab, in our beard, in our name, in many other things, we are, whether we like it or not, associated with Islam. How we behave becomes part of the image of Islam. And that image of Islam becomes part of our own personal image. It's a cycle. And so we have a responsibility to take every opportunity to make others think, hang on, when these people associate themselves with religion, it makes them better. Just like I started saying, when these people associate themselves with Hussein, they become better people than normal. brings the best in them. And this is our own individual responsibility externally. We have a responsibility towards our communities, of course to ourselves, to our communities, but this is an external responsibility. And this applies to each and every one of us, old and young. And you see, Imam al-Hussein, when he headed to Karbala, on his way out of Medina, and then similar conversation on his way out of Mecca, he was asked, you're heading to Iraq, you're heading to Kufa, a lot of the supporters, the leaders of the community have been arrested, many have been killed, you will be let down. He said, fine, I'm going. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to see me go. His message was to Mohammad ibn Hanafiya, his brother, and then also to somebody else who came to him, a friend who came to him and asked him some question as he was leaving Mecca. But then crucially, when he was asked, if you're going and you know you're going to be let down, or you expect to be let down, why are you taking women and children with you? Imam Hussein says, Sha'Allah wa yarahunna sabaya. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has willed to see them prisoners of war. Because it was a project, and the project needed that contribution. And that contribution went from very old people in their 90s, some of the companions, to the Imam who was in his late 50s, to Ali al-Akbar, to Al-Abbas who was in his 30s, to Ali al-Akbar who was in his 20s, to Al-Qasim who was in his teens, to Abdullah al-Radhi' who was less than a year old. Everybody contributed. And everybody put a stamp. And everybody added value. It's no coincidence that 1400 years later, almost, so many thousands of miles away, we sit here to talk about it. These things don't happen by coincidence. But obviously this is easy for us to sit and reflect on and say, well, what a great success. But it took so much personal loss, so much pain to achieve this. And Imam al-Hussein had to make the decision, had to watch the consequences. On the day of Ashura, Imam al-Hussein saw his companions. And these are not all of his companions. Many he told them to go and they went. These are the ones he told them to go and they didn't go. These are the ones on the eve of Ashura said, use the night to disappear, to disperse. They didn't. And he saw them go to battle. He saw them when there was a choice between between you doing something and somebody else doing it, they jumped at the opportunity. On the day of Ashura, we narrate the story that when it was prayer time, one of the companions said, I want to pray with you. And Imam al-Hussein prayed on the day of Ashura. The enemy didn't stop on the day of Ashura when the Imam was praying. They actually kept firing arrows in the direction of the Imam. And the arrows came in so heavy in that direction that a couple of people stood in front of the Imam, volunteered to stand in front of the Imam, making themselves as big as they could, so that the arrows would hit them and not the Imam. This is taking it personally, taking the public responsibility on a very personal level. Until by the time the Imam finished his prayer, and it was a very quick one, a very short one, he falls to the ground and says, have I done enough? And the Imam has to watch this, has to watch people like these fall to the ground. And then the role of the companions finished. And then who goes from Ahlul Bayt? Ali al-Akbar. He goes first. Hussein starts with his own son. The son who resembled the Prophet in the way he looked, in the way he behaved, his manners. And when he came to say his goodbye to Imam al-Hussein, his farewell, Imam hugged him. And they cried. And they fell to the ground, historians say. When Imam al-Hussein hugged Ali al-Akbar, they cried and the family cried. And then they fell to the ground. And then Ali al-Akbar goes to the battlefield. And Imam al-Hussein watches Ali al-Akbar go to the battlefield. And Layla, the mother of Ali al-Akbar, watches the face of Hussein as a reflection of the battlefield. And then the face of Hussein changes. Ali al-Akbar calls his last farewell. Alayka minni salam, Aba Abdullah. This means this is the end, that I'm gone. And Imam al-Hussein rushes to Ali al-Akbar. Historians say when he got next to the body of Ali al-Akbar, he threw himself from the horse on the body of Ali al-Akbar. He didn't just get off the horse, he threw himself. He hugged Ali al-Akbar. Ali al-Akbar, in those last few words, he had come to his father saying, Father, I'm thirsty, is there any water you can give me? And he said, no, I don't have any water. Soon you will see your grandfather who will give you some water. Ali al-Akbar in those moments says, this is my grandfather, has given me some water. And he says, Hussein, come quickly to us. Hussein, we're awaiting your coming. And there's some water for you. And then Imam al-Hussein calls his family that are still alive, that are still there. Ali al-Akbar was the first and says, carry Ali al-Akbar. I have no energy to carry him anymore. Imam al-Hussein, the warrior, the strong man, cannot carry Ali al-Akbar to the tent. And then Ali al-Akbar is brought back to his mother in pieces. In pieces. And Zainab and Layla and Imam Zain al-Abidin gather around the fallen hero. And then Imam al-Hussein, this is not the only son of Hussein. Imam al-Hussein, in those last moments of Hussein's life, when Abbas is gone, Ali al-Akbar is gone, everybody else is gone, he's saying his farewell to the family. They bring him this baby, 6 months old or so. Now this young baby was dying of thirst. His mother couldn't nurse him anymore. So they bring him to Hussein, say, he's dying anyway, could you ask for some water? And Hussein takes him and says, take this baby and give it some water. It's dying of thirst. And the enemy, even some of those thugs on the other side, started to feel some pain for Hussein, for the image of a little child dying of thirst. And then the commander of the army says to Harmala, end this. And Harmala says, I asked him, should I go for the father or son? He says, go for the son. And he says, I looked at him to aim, but he was covered and he was so small I couldn't find a spot to hit him. I didn't know where to hit him in case I miss him. He was so small. And then suddenly there was a bit of wind. And I could see a little bit of a shiny area, that where the sun was being reflected, and I could see some white there. So I aimed my arrow and pointed it towards the neck of the little baby. And he says, even then, I still wasn't moved. I was still going for it. And then when the arrow hit the baby in his neck and slaughtered the little baby, the little infant, it raised his arms, took them out of his covers, and hugged his father. And it's those moments when I saw this, Harmala, the killer of the baby, says, when I saw those moments, it broke my heart. Harmala, the enemy's heart is broken when he sees the little baby slaughtered in the arms of his father. And then Imam Hussein collects the blood, throws it to the sky, and then some narrations say he takes him back to the tent, some others say he buries him there on the ground. And Imam Zain al-Abidin and Zainab saw this, witnessed this, and this was the beginning of much more pain and sorrow to come. And they were just about to embark on this journey, which is nearing its end as we approach Arba'een. My brothers, my sisters, let us pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He may give us the clarity to make the right decisions, however difficult they may feel to us, however inconvenient. that we think long term, not short term. That we think of what is good for us in this life and the hereafter. And that since we never had the chance to be there on the day of Ashura with Hussein, that if we were to be given the opportunity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, we sincerely would make the right choices. We would be on the camp of Hussein on that day, not the other camp. And that our actions in this life, daily actions, our interaction with each other, our responsibility towards our parents, our community, our contributions, are all in line with that image and that story that we want to achieve, and we will achieve maybe inshallah when our Imam, the Imam of our time, Imam al-Mahdi Ajjallahu Farajah, returns. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.
السلام عليك يا رسول